I have been a Persona fan for almost 2 decades at this point, and I've played all mainline Persona games, and most Persona spin-offs too. For some reason, I have never played Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth to completion, and have never even touched Persona Q2. This changed when I recently and finally decided to give Persona Q a solid chance, and I'm very glad that I did. It's after around 65 hours of game time that I can safely say that Persona Q is the best Persona game you've never played. Probably. Persona Q is a Persona spin-off title that Atlus developed for the Nintendo 3DS. The game released in November of 2014 to critical success, and as of 2020 was the best-selling Persona spin-off of all time. The game is heavily inspired by Etrian Odyssey, another Atlus franchise. If you are an Etrian Odyssey fan and a Persona fan and you've never played Persona Q for some reason, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a sure bet for you, you don't even have to listen to my review. I suggest going into Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth thinking that it's a hardcore dungeon crawler twist on the Persona formula, rather than a different-ish or a smaller type of Persona game. The story of Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth is quickly explained to the player and is actually very simple, and I would say it's not the primary focus of this Persona game, especially when compared to mainline titles. The first thing that greets you is the choice to pick between the Persona 3 and Persona 4 main character for your playthrough of Q. For this review, I played the Persona 4 Yu Narukami route. The game takes place after the events of Persona 4 Golden during the Yasugami High Culture Festival, when suddenly a giant tower appeared in front of the school for no clear reason. As you investigate this sudden appearance, you understand that there is a rumor going around that whoever hears the bell of this new tower dies. The team stumbled upon a random door in school for an area called You in Wonderland that led everyone to Rei and Zen, the two new characters of Persona Q. You quickly understand that the mystery behind this tower and door that allows you to summon personas and meet with shadows was all related to these two new characters that of course are hit with amnesia. As you keep going with your investigation, you meet the Persona 3 cast who also heard the sound of the bells going off and were transported from Tartarus to Yasugami High. The combined forces of Cease and Investigation team allowed everyone to dive deep into the tower and find out that they need to explore 4 different areas in this tower that are actually labyrinths full of shadows. At the end of each labyrinth, there are objects scattered that will help your two new characters regain their memories and explain the mystery of Yasugami High. Something that is very important to me when playing a spin-off of a beloved franchise like Persona is to keep your characters as intact as possible. They did a great job here in Persona Q. The game is dubbed in English and the voice actors are back for the most part, so they actually sound like they used to sound like in Persona 3 and 4. For the most part. The writing for the characters is also top notch. Junpei is still stupid funny dude, Teddy is still annoying, and Mitsuru is still a boss lady. But the real goal here is the actual interactions between characters that never interacted with each other in mainline titles. In the first few hours of my playthrough, I heard Chie talk about food a bunch of times. Kanji called a mini-boss a son of a bitch, and he also thought and mentioned that Shinjiro was cool immediately after hearing him being grumpy. Teddy trying to impress the P3 girls made me feel right back at home with these beloved characters that made me fall in love with Persona 3 and 4. You meet the cast of Persona 3 right after the first boss in an epic cutscene where they basically come to save you, and it's pure fan service. I do want to say this story isn't anything that complex or that interesting either. I'll be honest. This game clearly has a heavy focus on gameplay rather than story, which doesn't mean that the story is bad, but it does mean that at times you'll just be like, okay, I guess. Like, again, the two new characters being hit with amnesia, yeah, of course they are. It's a little bit generic, but so is the story in most other Persona spin-off like Persona 5 Tactica, Persona 5 Strikers, they kind of Persona 4 Arena and 4 Dancing. Generally these spin-offs, they have a B tier type of story, and in that sense it's kind of higher tier for Persona Q versus the other spin-offs, again in my opinion. Now as you put your first few hours into Persona Q, it's clear that the heavy focus here isn't the story but the gameplay, as I mentioned before. To make your way to the end of this mystery, you need to explore all 4 of the gigantic labyrinths that are all made of multiple floors. As you explore every floor, you create your map of said floor to quickly be able to get back to where you were during your previous run. The gameplay loop is extremely addictive, and it was my favorite part of my playthrough for Etrian Odyssey 1 as well. It has the same gameplay loop. You build your party, you enter the labyrinth, you gather material and resources, you build your map, you fight shadows, you collect personas, and then you go back to Yasogami High, you heal at the nurse office, you sell your material and resources, you buy equipment, you fuse personas in the Velvet Room, then you change your party if necessary, and then you go back in to explore as much as you can. It might sound simple at first, but all of this can be done so quickly and it's so fluid that it's really enjoyable, and it's hard to put the game down when you're in, which is how I beat the game so quickly when I got back to it a few weeks ago. You probably have heard of this if you're watching this review, but Persona Q has a heavy emphasis on gameplay, but also on exploration and map creation. The idea of creating a map didn't sound too appealing to me at first, but with the different options available to you as the player, it made it fun for me. What I did is I used a semi-auto mapping feature where my map would basically write itself as I explore every little corner of every floor. I had to put doors and a few icons by myself using the bottom screen of my 3DS, but everything else was done automatically by the game, which made map creation a minor part of the game. It's super fun to explore as much as possible, and the game rewards you for it. All the floors of every labyrinth have a bigger chest that is locked until you complete your map at 100%. I love to explore every nook and cranny in first person, and the little puzzles scattered around every floor really help to keep my experience diverse. As you explore, you'll of course encounter shadows through random encounters. The flow of gameplay is extremely quick, it's really addictive. Small features like the ability to modify your map on your bottom screen during loading times or during certain animations like when you enter a battle is so satisfying to me as a huge fan of just being efficient in general. The game kept me hooked during long sessions of exploration by doing a lot of things right. Environments are as diverse as they can get in a first-person dungeon crawler 3DS game, but they honestly had some great ideas with this game, with the first labyrinth being a wonderland, the second one being some sort of group date cafe, and the third one being a big haunted place, and the fourth one just a traditional Japanese festival. It's designed very, very uniquely, and I'm here for it. The enemy designs are even more unique and original, especially the FOEs, which are some of the more dangerous enemies that roam on every single floor of the labyrinths.
Senpai, your energy is getting low. Be careful.
Whoa, what's with that giant one?
I know what that is. That must be one of those SOBs.
Kanji, don't provoke them!
These FOEs are used in a super original way with every single floor. Sometimes they're just gonna roam around and you better avoid them. Other times they'll just shoot an arrow and try to hypnotize you from a distance, so then you move forward to them. Or they might even just pop in as some sort of ghost and jump scare you. I realize that saying it might not sound like much, but don't underestimate this gameplay feature. I thought it was really interesting and very fun as well. It just made the experience more diverse, especially again coming out of the original Etrian Odyssey, which is pretty much Persona Q but even more basic in general. Every now and then the game stops the great flow of gameplay a little bit because you found something in the labyrinth that started a side quest. Now I'll be honest, I'm generally a huge fan of side content and especially side missions in my RPGs, but what Persona Q has to offer in that sense, it just ain't it. Most of the side quests have an insanely long dialogue with it that is very surfacey and not that deep, which makes most of them very unmemorable. Plus, these side quests are all your RPG cliche side quests. Collect X number of items, beat X number of monsters, etc. The fact that you randomly start a quest during exploration for your main goal with a long-ass dialogue. Generally, again, I'm just summarizing my experience here, but generally the game's gonna stop you completely. You're gonna have a boring, long-ass dialogue, and then boom, you're back to your exploration. It really took me off the experience at time, especially since they forced me into these new side quests, which again, is not a deal breaker, but definitely something to keep in mind. Now, as you would expect, there are a lot of interactions between party members, which consist of both P4 and P3 characters, which made for some very funny and entertaining moments, especially when P3 characters interacted with P4 characters. It's the forced dialogues, forced side content during my main quest exploration that bother me. I played the side quest for the early hours of my playthrough for Persona Q, but then I stopped and I just skipped that dialogue whenever I was gonna get new side quests because they were just that boring to me. So now's the time to talk about combat, which is going to be a more positive section of this review. The combat is certainly a big highlight of Persona Q. You have 5 party members at a time to control during combat and a navigator, either Risei or Fuka. The MC must be used in combat, but all 4 other party members and navigator can be changed freely outside of the labyrinth. The protagonist has the ability to use leader skills, which are navigator skills, to help the whole party in battle with very unique moves. For example, a move that you unlock early on allows you to give the first move of a turn to a specific character. All party members have a main persona and can also equip sub-personas. This made for some very interesting builds, especially since you have 20 party members to pick from. Exploiting enemy weaknesses has always been a staple in Persona titles, and it's the same thing here. That being said, the turn-based combat system here is not the typical one more system that we were used to with Persona 3 and 4 at the time. In Q, when you hit an enemy weakness with a party member, said party member enters boost mode, which means that for their next turn, this party member will be able to do a move without consuming any HP and or MP. If a character gets hit during boost mode, they will lose their boost. There's another twist with the boost mode though, and it's the only way to recruit personas. The more party members that are in boost mode when you finish a battle, the more chances you have to gain a new persona at the end of battle. It's not the most fun way to recruit personas, but it's effective and it works just fine. We've seen better, we've seen worse from Persona titles. Speaking of personas, one of my criticism with Persona Q is the variety and number of personas in game. Early on, I felt like I was always getting the same personas after every battle, always the same ones coming back and no variety, and it felt a bit strange since it's certainly not an issue in mainline titles. So I went online and looked up how many personas are in game, and there is an astounding number of 190 personas outside of your main party personas, which honestly is far from bad. It's a lot. It's a bit confusing to me why I was always getting the same ones through battles, and I'm talking like before reaching 30 hours of playtime. It was always like generally the same personas always coming back. If from a labyrinth to another it would change, but when I was in the same labyrinth, not a lot of variety. So my guess would be that a high percentage of these personas that I didn't get were locked behind fusion, because when you enter the Velvet Room, you have a lot of options. Not a big deal. Anyways, the boost mode function must not be underestimated as it creates a bunch of new strategies. For example, I quickly realized that I could take advantage of the boost mode to heal freely some of my party members before I end the battle, which made it easier to explore for a long time when I ran out of items to heal myself. So, at the end of battle, I have Yukiko in boost mode. I have an option. I can either do a big ass Mediarama and heal everybody for no MP because she's in boost mode, but then if I do that, she loses boost mode, which means it lowers my chances to gain a new persona at the end of battle. Again, a twist that is very interesting gameplay wise. There's also elements from previous Persona titles that I really have in mind when I play a new Persona game. For example, buffs and debuffs. But here in Persona Q, it's kind of like, hey, we're a Persona game, but we're a little bit different. Buffs and debuffs are here, but they're not as important, I found. So generally when I play these games, I spam buffs and debuffs, and that's how I win. In Persona Q, I didn't feel the need to use them as much. And that's not to say that the game is easy. This game is cute. The characters are chubby, they're inoffensive, but don't let this fool you. This game is going to crush you. Persona Q is far from an easy game even when being played in normal difficulty. The difficulty was enjoyable to me for the most part, with no need to grind regardless of me skipping side quest after 10 hours. But you do have to constantly fuse personas and swap equipment and to keep up with your current best in slot equipment that you can wear to be able to progress smoothly in the labyrinths. In terms of the puzzles, they're generally fairly easy to understand, and some of them are also very exciting and interesting, especially when you get to the later part of the game with like the haunted house labyrinth and stuff. There is some very interesting and intriguing puzzles in there. But don't worry, there is no mainline Shin Megami Tensei teleport maze if that's what you're scared of. There's no Strange Journey Sector E or anything like that. It's feasible without a guide for sure. I think one of the main reasons why I held off from playing Persona Q for so many years is mainly because of my preference for mainline at the time when it came out. I was hardcore into Shin Megami Tensei 4 and the lot of spin-offs that Atlus dropped on the 3DS, like Devil Survivor, the remastered Soul Hacker game, and Strange Journey, all that good stuff. One of the other things that I think held me off from playing it is definitely the presentation for Persona Q. The chubby character models are very fitting for a 3DS game, but I wasn't a fan at first. That being said, they definitely grew on me as I was playing the game. Although I will say I definitely prefer the QT style that Atlus went with Persona 5 Tactica, which generally people compare Tactica to Persona Q in terms of art style. But what's in store here with Persona Q isn't bad, and again, it grew on me as I played the game. I would not call myself a big fan of it today, and again, I still prefer Tactica, but it's certainly alright. Playing it on my new 3DS XL, the 3D effect is very solid, although I played most of my playthrough without it, since, as most 3D games do, it makes me feel a little weird after playing it for a long session. But if you're a 3D fan, it's very decent here. I tried it out and it's perfectly fine. Persona Q does not feel like a 3DS game at times. This game impressed me visually on certain occasions. During the entrance animation of the second boss, for example, which I won't show for spoiler purposes, I was really impressed with the highly detailed animations that were shown to me. Again, impressive for a 3DS game. Just like in Persona 5 Tactica though, Persona Q has a lot of cutscenes with just a bland fixed background scene, which I do not mind, but it's something to keep in mind if that's an issue for you. Same thing for, let's say, the Persona 4 Arena games or the dancing games. So it's a little, that's how they cut budget costs, you know? The voice acting here is very solid, but not all voice actors are back for this game, as I mentioned in my intro. For example, Kanji isn't Troy Baker anymore, but he's voiced by Matt Mercer, which he did a good job in this one. Some of y'all's favorite are still untouched though. For example, Laura Bailey is back to voice Rise Kujikawa. But in general, I would say the dub is still very solid here, and I'm glad that there is a dub because it allows me to like quickly notice an important scene versus a scene that isn't that important, like again the long ass dialogue that I was mentioning before for side quests, which are generally uninteresting. I found myself enjoying the voice cutscenes for the main story quite a lot. Persona Q is overall a visually pleasing game, but it really stands out with its enemy and bosses designs, and especially the labyrinths themselves, which looks super unique and diverse, especially compared to Etrian Odyssey 1, which again is the only Etrian Odyssey game that I've fully experienced the completion. The soundtrack for Persona Q is, just like most Persona games, absolutely fire. I used some of the tracks from this game in a bunch of my videos even before playing the game. That alone should tell you a lot about this music. Hearing remixes of tracks that we all know and love from Persona 3 and 4 is an absolute treat. The first Labyrinth theme really clicked with me right at the start, but my favorite tracks are definitely the tracks for the bosses and fights with the FOEs or side quest enemies. So, after watching my review, should you play Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth? I would say if you enjoy a good and unforgiving dungeon crawler with a Persona touch, sure, go for it. You'll have a blast like I did. If you're going into it expecting a Persona 3.5 or a 4.5, you won't be happy with this one. There's no social links, the story is fairly simple, and the dialogue, while heavy at times, it's nothing too deep compared to mainline games. Persona Q is a different style of game made for Persona fans. I consider Persona Q to be one of the best Persona spin-offs of all time for sure. I'm certainly going to try out Persona Q2 in the future now. I preferred my time with Persona Q over some of the dancing games, over the arena games, and definitely over Persona 5 Strikers as well, so it's a high recommendation for me on the list. If you've been sleeping on this game for years, but you're a big fan like myself, give it a chance at least, and let's hope you have a blast like I did. Thank you for watching my review of Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth. You have a good day. Bye.